Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider. I'm really happy to have Steve Kaplan with us today from Chicago Booth. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So today we are going to talk about corporate venturing, which you know a lot about. We discussed before. But first, can you share a bit your journey into corporate venturing?
So it's been a long road. And I would say corporate venturing and venture in general. I've been a finance professor at University of Chicago at the Booth School of Business since 1988. And I started there and I taught corporate finance. And I had done my doctoral dissertation was about leverage buyouts. So I knew something about private equity. I really, knew nothing about venture capital and startups. And I got tenure in 1995. And then at about that time, the person who was teaching entrepreneurial finance at Booth, Paul Gompers, decided to go back to Harvard Business School. So the dean said, I can find other people to teach corporate finance. It's hard to find someone who can teach venture capital and private equity. Will you do it? And so I said, okay. I'd been teaching the same thing for a while. And so I started teaching uh, private equity and venture. It was sort of half buyouts, half venture in 1996. And then, though I started teaching it, one of my students came to me and said, these other schools are starting to have business plan competitions. Could we have one? And I said, okay. And I said, you do the work. I'll find you some judges and some money. And so we did our business plan competition I think the first one was in the spring of 97. And then the dean said, "Oh, now you're really doing, entrepreneurship, and we need to have an entrepreneurship program. I'm putting you in charge of entrepreneurship." So thank you very much. And that's how I got into it.
And we're going to talk about what became of that business plan competition because this is truly remarkable. But let's not be humble when you say you knew about private equity. I think there was an article from Fortune that described you as probably the foremost private equity scholar in the galaxy. So clearly you knew a lot.
No, that's correct. I've been doing research on it for a long time, and I've written some good research on private equity, venture capital, lots of things.
Very nice. So one thing that we should start with, because you've looked at both private equity and venture capital, is it like a spectrum or is it like some very different asset class, and how we should be thinking about that? How should we think about the two? Because they work together at some point in time. They hand off from one to the other. So how should we think about them?
So they're different. I mean, you sort of have this range, right? You have over here you have startups, over here you have buyouts, and I think the as you get here more mature, it's really you're taking an existing business and trying to figure out how to make it better.
Mm.
And in some sense, it's value investing. In some sense, you can be growing, but you're making something that exists better. And that's kind of how my mind works. I mean, that's where I come from. Over as you get earlier and earlier, it's really about figuring out where the future is going. And so because it doesn't exist, right? The best startups are like, something new, and being able to say, okay, the world is going there, that way this is going to work is it's a different, I think, mindset and skill set. So, some people I can have both, but my experience, I have two sons, and one son is over here. He sees the future, and then the other son is over here, and I'm kind of more over here by temperament.
That's very interesting. So in a way, what you teach, you have in your own family with your two sons.
No, I'm very lucky. One guy's doing a startup now. He's like close to, having it ready to go raise money. And the other guy is working for a private equity firm. So very good. I have very good on the ground information. The students can't pull the wool over my eyes because I go right to the source.
Okay, so let me double click on that. And clearly you could tell probably when they were even younger, but what are the traits you would say if you have a student that comes to you and asks, should I go in private equity? Should I go in venture capital? Should I work in startups? What are maybe the one or two questions you're going to ask to know very quickly which one they should lean on?
Okay, it's tricky. So first of all, should you do a startup? Are you going to come up with something new? And again, the startups I care about are kind of the high um, octane startups, not a dry cleaner or a
No,
restaurant.
the high risk, high reward.
I want sort of venture. Think about venture funded startups,
Yep.
which is what we're talking about. So I'm not sure, coming up with the ideas and then like going and driving it. That's a skill set. Some people are kind of have the mindset to do that. They want to go out and
Mm.
try things, break things. The Elon Musks or Steve Jobs of this world, and other people are more, that's not what they do, that's not their mindset. So then, but you can go work for a startup that someone
Yep.
else has started, right? So that's that. Because once you have the idea and you have the vision, then you need to execute. And so I think execution is constant across everything, in that, once you have a good idea, good business, you need a good jockey, right? You need someone to drive it and help get there. So you could be, someone who wants to do that, and I think go across the spectrum. I think starting something and also investing in something, you kind of it's a somewhat different mindset. And then on the private equity side, again, that's where you're looking for opportunities where there's a business that you can make better somehow. So some people are buying family-owned businesses that are private and professionalizing them. Maybe bringing in sales, bring it that they haven't had, bringing in systems they haven't had. Other people will take a business that's a little bigger and is maybe doesn't have the right strategy, doesn't know how to use technology, and they'll bring in those ideas or help. Sometimes they'll help the CEO, sometimes they'll bring someone else in and make the company better, because that's how. I mean, it's really how you make money, and everywhere you make money by growing faster than you otherwise would have. And obviously, startups, you got to grow or you lose money.
Yep.
And the mature companies, you don't make money. You do a buyout, you don't make money by cutting everything. You make money by getting it efficient, but then growing it, because people aren't paying for something that's dying; they're paying for something that's growing.
It's funny when you say you make money by growing, but some people would argue that with some startups have negative unit economics like Uber used to have, and so the more money you make, the more money you lose as well, and so there is a time of reckoning, I guess.
No, at some point you have to make money. So I think there are some businesses where, again, the vision is, we lose money for a while and then we make it. Usually those businesses, though, have, positive gross margin, right? And that's what, people, the DSTs and Tigers sort of saw, that the Facebooks of this world had positive gross margins and would grow into their valuation. So I think there's got to be some sense of positive economics, but to grow, you can spend money for quite a long time. And then of course, there's always the risk you won't get that money, right? So it's
Yep, yep.
it's a always a trade-off.
So, Steve, you just mentioned earlier value investing, and I think maybe it's intuitive what it is, but do you mind explaining what is really value investing?
I mean, value investing, I think in public markets and I guess in private markets is where you see an asset or a company that's undervalued and you buy it. And so for public company investors, they're looking for stocks where the market doesn't appreciate what is really there and where they think it's going to go up. I think when you in private equity it's a little different, and also with the activist investors it's a little different because they're looking for situations where they can buy stuff obviously for less than it's worth, but the value investing may also include they're doing something to help increase the value. So that would be true in private equity. It's an asset that's an undermanaged asset. So that and activists and public companies do the same thing. They're sort of looking for situations that are undermanaged where they can either directly or indirectly fix that and make the company worth more.
So I think it's interesting. So I did a training on being on board of public companies, and we of course talk about activists. I would love to have your take on the value, the pros and cons of activists, because clearly it's putting pressure on the company, but some of that pressure may be valid and some may be for ulterior motives. So how do you think about the activists? And clearly they have moved on from 10 years ago to 5 years ago to today. So how should we think about activist investment?
I mean, my sense of the activists, and I've been on boards that have had activists appear, is that they're kind of generally doing the right thing. I mean, they're going after companies where there's some evidence that they're undermanaged, and that they think that the solution is to change how you manage the companies. Now, they're not always right, and
Yeah.
that's where, if you're on the board, if you think they're not right, your job is to push back and explain why they're not right. And sometimes, you can convince them. Sometimes they're right, and you want to listen to them. So I think at least my the empirical evidence, in large samples, my small sample evidence in some of the situations that I know what happened on the inside, is that they're looking for situations where things are undermanaged. They are often undermanaged, and they're pushing for the right things, and that's sort of, and they're not always right, but that's a capitalist system. People make investments, and you argue it out in the market.
And for the audience, it's very easy to argue that there is a clear alignment with what they say because they have to take a position in the company first. So they do have a vested interest to be right.
No, and they're usually paid for performance, so there's definite incentive alignment on the activists, I would say, and certainly the private equity investors and venture capital investors.
Now, I want to go back to something way more fun, the business plan competition. Clearly, that has morphed into something way bigger. But do you mind telling us the story of how it started and how it built momentum over time? Because I think that's something which maybe the audience are thinking about starting something small. And I think it's quite inspiring to know about how it might become in the future.
So this is the business plan competition. It's actually called the Ed Kaplan New Venture Challenge, and he was the founder of Zebra Technologies, and he's not related to me, unfortunately.
I was
So
going to ask, so that's good
what?
to clarify.
So it's the Kaplan New Venture Challenge, but it's not me. So it started, as I said, in '97, and I asked the students how was it, and they said it was great, but we didn't really have time to work on our plans. They said it would have been much better if it had been a course. So the next year, I started doing it as a course, and I effectively stumbled on the Y Combinator slash TechStars model like 10 years before they did. So, if I had if I weren't a professor, I, should have started Y Combinator, but I was a tenured professor, so I didn't. In any event, the way it works is you get students to submit a preliminary business plan in January. And then you take those plans and you only accept the ones that are promising. So it's really important you get rid of the plans that aren't going anywhere.
Yep.
And again, that's kind of what Y Combinator does. They source and look for good plans. Then once they get into the course, what what I increasingly did, and did this a little bit when I started and did it more and more over time to the point where it's pretty systematized now, is I meet with all my teams and ask, how can I help you? And so, who can I connect you with? And I now have a team where I've got 5 or 6 coaches where they meet with all the teams and plug them into their network. And so, if you need, I need, we had one student, which I'll talk about later, needed a supplier of almond flour. Well,
Mm.
one of the coaches knew, a manufacturer who had almond flour, and so we try to, maybe introduce them to a potential customer if they're B2B. So it's kind of what you do. Then in the course, you have them present, and I bring in, 10 or 12 investors or entrepreneurs, and they present. They're really early, like they don't know what they're doing. In their first presentation, they really get beaten up very badly,
Mm.
and it's hugely productive because they realize, oh my God, I have a ton of work to do. And they do that. I'm about to do that in April. And I have 12 teams, and one of my colleagues has another section. He has 12 teams. When I started doing it, we had 12 teams total. Now we have somewhere between 24 and 30 every year. And the teams present in April. They get beaten up. They fix their plans, and they redo their plans. They respond to the feedback. They present again in May, and they're like hugely better. It's like unbelievable how much better they are from January. January when they apply, then they're better in April, and then they're better again in May. And it's like, in some cases, it's just astonishing how much better they get. And then from the 24 plans, we'll put 10 into the finals, which we do end of May, beginning of June. And so, the first time we did it, I think we had $25,000 in prize money. And over time, we've gotten better, and we've had, the thing that's fantastic is, the teams have to have, one MBA student on it. So it's sort of, we're sourcing locally. It's not like, the huge sourcing Y Combinator sources from all over the world. We source just from our MBA students.
Which is
And
a very good sourcing to start.
it's a very good, so it's a very, yeah, it's a high quality group, but it's not, it's not the whole world.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and then, who have we had? We had our teams over the years have raised over $1 billion, and exit values have been over 10 billion. And so we had, in 2006, we had Grubhub. In 2007, we had Braintree, which bought Venmo, which got bought by PayPal. And then in 2014, we had this company called Simple Mills, which was gluten-free, low sugar baked goods.
Mm.
So her first, was Caitlin Smith was the entrepreneur. Her first product was muffin mix, and she became the biggest selling muffin mix on Amazon. And then she went into cookies, crackers, all sorts of other baked goods. And she just sold her company last month for $795 million. So that's our third exit over 750 million, and it's huge fun. We got a couple of others running around that are doing pretty well, and so that's my experience. So I've seen I started doing this really in the .com era, right? 97, 98. And I saw mobile. Now I'm seeing AI, and, hopefully I'll see something else.
And so for the audience, that's why I was saying this is quite amazing to think it started with a business plan competition. And now this is a 1 billion invested worth $10 billion with truly amazing startup that came out of it. So I just find it inspiring.
Good. It's great. I mean, it is. It's unbelievable. It's huge fun, and I mean that's the sort of the nice thing about it. You get these great students, and you can really help them. And and actually, the older you get, the more you can help them because you have a better network. So it's really it's huge fun because you're seeing new stuff, and it's across. We're not focused. So we see, we have food, and we have, we had one of our winners a couple of years ago, like builds equipment for space. So it's sort of all over the place. It's huge fun, and you can really help the students, and they're terrific.
I think there is a golden nugget as well, which is because a business plan has to be written upfront, it's very applied, which means that when they go through the course, they can probably relate, oh, this is what I didn't do here, this is what I should add there. And then, of course, what you said is, I think, the truth for any entrepreneurs pitching to VCs. There's nothing like feedback about what you you are so focused on, you might actually miss out some parts which are so important for your business. And so I'm not surprised of the dramatic improvement from that first contact to investors and entrepreneurs to the next one.
No, and we push, I think what they also get pushed on is because there are deadlines, there's a tight time frame. They really work hard. Like some of them, last year's winner, I think they started in January and they were talking to some customers, and this is a logistics business for basically chilled and frozen food logistics, which is a little bit different from logistics, regular logistics, and because of the refrigeration. And when they started, they had the idea. They were talking to customers. By the time they were done, end of May, or not done, but the finals, they had a bunch of companies signed up as betas, and they had coverage of like, I think they had 20% of the market covered, and they had geographic coverage of the whole country, and they had like a big time. It was like unbelievable, but it was something where there was a real need, and they ended up doing that while they while they were doing their pitches and building their business, and then they won, and they won about I want to say $1 million or so in investment in the competition, and then they raised another million very quickly right thereafter from one of the judges. So they raised $2 million, and now they're off operating, and we'll see how they do.
Well, I think you're making a very compelling case why the Chicago Bulls Entrepreneurs Program is special, because you're talking about not just learning about entrepreneurship, but actually applying it and potentially coming out of it with a startup that's already in full speed.
Yeah, no, some people come to the school with their company expecting to build it, and some people come up with the ideas, while they're there, and then build it while they're there. So we get both.
All right, now I think it's time to talk about the jockey. Jockey, horse, fit. Clearly, there is something about the jockey in this case, but do you mind for the audience explaining what is a jockey, what is a horse, the fit, so that we can then deep dive into it?
Sure. Let me tell you. Just 1 second. Am I blurry or am I okay? Does my camera look normal?
Yep, I can see you well.
Okay. Okay. Good. So the horse is obviously the business, and the jockey is the founder, or founders running it. And like I said, I think you need. I've got various research that says you have to have a good business. If you have a good business, you have a chance. And then once you have a good business, you need somebody who is going to execute and grow the business, and that's the jockey or the founder.
Okay. And how can you tell if someone is going to be the right jockey for a very early stage startup?
So that's a good question that a lot of investors ask, and I would say, I've actually done a lot of research on CEOs and what makes a good CEO. It's more what you want to start there, and some of it. So these people are more. It's private equity funded companies, and it's also public companies. But I'm pretty sure this works for venture funded companies as well. And essentially, the you can look at a lot of CEO characteristics, but they boil down. There's sort of four general factors
Mm-hmm.
that executives have, and one is like you call talent, where they do a lot of things well, and you can measure that. And the things would be hiring, firing, being a good listener, being treating people with respect. Let's see, what I'm trying to think: being efficient, being proactive, persistent, being creative, being strategic, being charismatic. There's sort of 30 different variables, but when you boil them down into four things, there's one that's talent, which is just sort of the sum of all those things I mentioned.
Okay.
There's a factor that looks like being creative and strategic, as opposed to being like managerial.
Mm-hmm.
There's a variable that looks like charisma, sort of being persuasive, being persistent, being enthusiastic. And then there's a factor that looks like it's actually it's a trade-off. And what the factor, it's actually the second factor after talent. And it explains a lot of variation, meaning people tend to be fall in one of these buckets or another. One is sort of execution, where it's persistent, efficient, proactive. And the other side is the interpersonal likability, the treating people with respect, being a good listener. And those variables tend to be correlated, meaning they explain a fair amount of the variation in the data. And you can just add those, you add the execution or subtract the sorry, it's the other way around. You add the interpersonal, you subtract the execution, and that kind of explains a lot of variation. So the CEOs, it turns out, tend to be more talented. The CEOs tend to be more charismatic. They tend to be more creative, strategic. And I always ask, because this one's harder, are they more execution or are they more interpersonal? Because,
Interesting.
because a
So,
lot of people would say CEOs should be both, right?
yeah,
But it
yeah.
turns out they skew one way a little bit more than the other.
I think you're right that all these traits, I think, applies for early stage founders as well. I think the one that doesn't come across, which you would expect, is grit.
I
Because
think
when you
that's
start,
execution. I would call that the execution variable. And so the CEOs do tend to be more execution oriented. And then when you look at performance, it turns out that the creative, strategic, and the execution are predictive. So charisma doesn't do very much. The interpersonal doesn't do anything. It's sort of irrelevant. And it's the execution, or you could call that grit, that is the predictor of performance in a couple of different data sets that I've used. So if you were telling me what I was looking for in a CEO, someone who's creative, strategic, and executes. And so that would of course be Steve Jobs, not the nicest guy. That would be Jeff Bezos. That would be Elon Musk. I mean, those are the characteristics. It would also actually, by the way, be Satya Nadella, who is nice, right? So you can be nice. You don't have to be a jerk, but creative, strategic, and execute. And Satya does that very well.
Let me give you two more that are nice. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA
There you
and
go.
Reid.
Okay, right. Because he execute, boy, creative, strategic, and executes.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think Reid Hoffman also would qualify well.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I don't, I know. Okay. Very interesting. Okay.
So, but I think it's interesting because at TDK Ventures, when we invest in very early stage founders, we look for, and of course, we play with the word TDK, which is a background of magnets. We look for magnetic founders with charisma. And the reason is they need to be able to tell a good story to investors, but to customers, to partners, but also to recruits, people that would want to join into the mission. And I feel like maybe charisma is less important for a CEO of a public company. You could argue it's needed, but when you're early stage and you need to convince so many different stakeholders, charisma start to be really make it or not.
No, that's very interesting. I don't have great, I don't have great data to measure that, so that could very well be the case. I think the execution, you don't have the execution, you're dead. I think anywhere, and I think the charisma, it is that is the case. I'll tell you something though that's interesting. In one of the papers I just wrote, which again, it speaks to the business mattering, and it speaks to um, I'm not sure about it speaks less about the what the traits are, but I got this data set of all the deals that a seed investor in the Midwest looked at over like a 6 year period.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was like thousands. And of those thousands, he ended up looking carefully at three or 400. And then of those three or 400, he invested in like 80 or 90. And so the 400 that he looked at, he rated the management team, the product, and the market of the business. And so the first thing I did was said the ones that he saw but didn't look at hard, how did they do versus the ones he looked at, didn't invest in versus the ones he looked at and invested in. And the good news was it was like that. These did the best, these did second best, these did the worst. So there's some selection ability even very early. Then I looked at, and these things haven't exited, so this is preliminary, but you could look at, did they raise $1 million? Did they raise 10 million? Did they raise 25? And the best predictor of raising $1 million or more was the management team.
Okay.
But then the predictor of raising 10 million or more was the business. So this goes to the thing that the early stage stuff, get the business right, that a really good founder can't fix a bad business, that the business mattered more. But I can't tell you in that sample, with the ones who succeeded, was it charisma or
Yeah.
execution
Yeah.
or what?
But let me ask about the business model. Is it about the size of the market potential, or is it more than that?
It was the product. It wasn't the market was a separate thing. So the market was, predicted some of the stuff, but it was the product and whether they thought it was a good business.
So the value capture mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Now, I definitively would like you to explain your framework outside impacts, because this is what you teach. And I'm more looking of a 5 minutes type of framework, because then I want to be able to double click inside. So if you can give us a 5 minutes introduction to that framework, which I think is so helpful in making sure you don't miss important things.
No, it's very nice. So here's what I did when I started. Like as I told you, when I started teaching, I didn't really know venture. I knew buyout, but I didn't know venture. and so I had to learn it. So one of someone I knew introduced me to a local venture capitalist who was very friendly, and he and his team invited me to sit in on his pitch days every month. So every month they would all get together, and the companies that they were, most interested in would come in and pitch. So I would sit in on those pitch days. And then I learned or knew, they wrote an investment memo for each of those companies they were serious about. So I ended up talking to them and to, I think another, say 10 or so VC firms, and said, can you give me some of your investment memos? So I ended up getting something like 70 investment memos from, 10 firms, and then, wrote a paper on it and just saying, okay, what do they look at? And so it turns out that they all look at certain things. And so this framework comes out of looking at those investment memos and saying, here's what VCs do. So outside impacts, um, outside O is opportunity, and the impacts are the questions you ask about the opportunity. So think of the opportunity as the business.
Mm-hmm.
U is uncertainty, T is team, S is strategy, I is investment, D is deal, E is exit. So let me, I'll get to those, but start with the business. That's the opportunity. What are impacts? Well, I is the idea. So you have to, what's your, 20-second or 30-second pitch? What's the idea? M is the market. So that's what you asked me. You want to have, it's got to be, ideally, it's a big and growing market. The bigger it is, and the more it's growing, the more, mistakes you can make.
Yep.
P, let me come back to. A is acceptance. So A is really two things. It's, will you get customers? So that's like, do the dogs eat the dog food? That's, is do you, I mean, it's really, do you get customers? That's
Yep.
acceptance.
Yep.
And then once you get customers, can you make money delivering to those customers? And that's really LTV to CAC, right? Lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. So I put that under acceptance, and it's really, can you get customers and can you make money on them? Uh, C, IMPAC. So A is acceptance, C is competition. So who's the competition? Why are you going to win? T is one that's is actually something that I think Peter Thiel has this too in 0 to 1. T is timing. So
Yep.
it's why is this, a startup now? Why wasn't this here 5 years ago? And
Why
that's sort
now?
of viewed like is the future, right? So what's new? And S is speed. Can you get to market quickly enough to make money? And so that's, and then P is sort of a summary version of why is this, in finance speak, why is this positive present value, which is a little nerdy, but it's really what's proprietary, what's your edge. So
Yes.
P is why, it's really why do you win? And do you have a special technology? Is there a first mover advantage? Is there a network effect? Are you like just the best? You have the best team. What is it that makes you the winner? And so that's I stick all that under the opportunity.
I think the P
You
is very important because at TDK Ventures, it's our reason to believe the startup will be the king of the hill, the future
correct,
market leader.
correct, correct. And it may be, some of them it's just, we execute better. Simple Mills, like, she hit the right market, boy. It was, gluten free, better for you. She hit that early.
Yep.
And I think her P was she made better tasting stuff, right? It
Yep.
just tastes good. and she executed. She it was a first mover advantage, and she executed. So
And I'm guessing
um,
speed was very good too.
speed was very good too, and she had good branding. I mean, she just sort of did everything right. You was the interesting one as well. You is uncertainty,
Mm,
and that means risk. And so every single investment memo that I saw said, we love this company because of A, B, C, and D. And they're investing, right? So they like the company. But every single one said, you, or risk, here's what we're worried about. And there was not one deal where it's like, oh, this succeeds 100%. And we know half venture capital investments actually lose money. So there's always risk, but they're explicit about it. Here's what we're worried about. And sometimes it'll be, we're worried whether the thing works. Sometimes there are a couple of times where it said, we love the business, but the guy is crazy or the gal is crazy, so we're nervous about the founder. And it's very funny to read these, and but there's always uncertainty. And if you're an entrepreneur, you wanna know what can bite you and try to protect against it. And if you're an investor, the same thing. What am I worried about, and can I do things to protect myself against those risks? So that's you. T is the team. So T is O is the horse, and T is the jockey. So
yeah.
you want a team that I think, ideally you want a team and a founder who has domain expertise, or who, has a reason why he or she can run the business. And then I think, grit, execution skills that you mentioned. And I think, being able to sell it to employees and investors and customers. So, I don't know if it's charisma, but it's an ability to sell. Then S is strategy. So what's your strategy? And it helps me spell outside, but it's also the case that, with a lot of these businesses, you may not know your strategy. What's your go to market? There's some question about that. Who are you selling to exactly? So, what's your strategy? Then I is investment. So that's where you look at the numbers. And so that's where you want to make sure that there's some path to making money, right? And I tell the students, to think about that as CIMITYM. So I'll say that slowly,
Yeah.
CIMITYM. And that stands for cash is more important than your mother. And why? Why? Which sometimes gets some like stares, but it's like your business, can succeed without your mother, but it can't succeed without cash. So be very, very careful about figuring out how much money you need, and
Yep.
then getting the money to do that, particularly if you're losing money, right? If you're, the Ubers of this world, they had real financing risk for quite a while. Let's see. D is the deal. So D is if you're negotiating a deal, you want to make sure, both as the entrepreneur and as the investor, that both sides have the right incentives. So you don't want the valuation to be too low
Mm,
that it disincentivizes the founder. You don't want the valuation to be too high that it disincentivizes the investor. So you want some a reasonable valuation, and then you also want reasonable governance. So
yeah.
that's where you don't want, if you're an investor, stay away from an FTX structure where there was no governance,
Yep.
and I would say make sure you put in responsible governance. And then E is exit. How do you get your money out? Is there someone going to buy you? Can you go public? How do is there a path to making money on your investment? And I guess the same is true if you're the entrepreneur. So there you go, outside impacts, and that was a mouthful.
No, no, it's very good. And I think with that framework, where do you think corporate VCs can really shine and bring something special versus VCs?
So where the corporate VCs, I think, potentially have an advantage is on the acceptance, because they're in some cases they're the potential customer
Yeah.
or supplier, or something where they have some insight into the business and can help the startup get customers, because that's at the end of the day, that's the most important thing is
Yep.
can you get customers? You get
Yeah.
customers, that makes up for a lot of sins. And so the corporate VC can be helpful there, and maybe that provides some P for
Yep.
the corporate VC, that they're either a customer, supplier, or bringing some, or maybe bring some managerial expertise or some sort of help that the startup doesn't have itself, and maybe that another VC can't bring as much. The trade-off is the startup getting too tied into the one corporate VC, which is what they get nervous about. But that's a different issue. I think the place where they can help is really on the acceptance side, and probably also advice or help on the competition side. So it'd be A and C of impacts, with factoring
Yep.
into a P for the corporate VC.
I think there is. I think this is where the framework is so helpful because at the end you could argue the P is the most important part, and the CVC can lend their credibility, expertise, and go to market on all of that, which goes into the acceptance. I think maybe I want to ask: do you think that when corporate VCs invest, knowing that they have industry knowledge, it gives a signal that the timing is also potentially right for the startup?
I think that's another good point, that um, if they're in the industry and they have an ability to see forward, they can see this is the right time, or not. I mean, when they're making their decision, but if they decide this is the right time, they might have some advantage in seeing that.
So I think you're making a good case on why entrepreneurs could or should consider CVCs. What would be, you think, the place where on this framework, a CVC could be a negative?
So I think the CVCs are potentially the positives, and I've seen actually successful CVCs, particularly in healthcare, at least the
Mm,
ones I've seen, and actually fin fintech as well. Where they're customers, and they can provide strategic advice on the competitive situation, and maybe they're there for the timing. So those are the good things. And the risk, or the thing that the entrepreneurs and regular VCs I talk to say, I think are two. Number one, we talked about that if they are a customer, you're tied to them, and
mm, mm, mm.
maybe affect your ability to exit with other people. So that's more important probably in life sciences than other places. But that's always a concern. Am I too tied up with this one firm, so it reduces my exit options? So that's one. The second thing is they do get nervous that the corporate VC will stick with them. So that's the corporate VCs tend to get started when markets are hot, and then when they cool down, does the corporate VC go away? So if you're looking for, corporate VC comes into a Series B, and then you go out and raise a Series C, and the corporate VC all of a sudden isn't around, or because I don't have any money or things have cooled down, it's a bad signal. It's maybe there's some bureaucracy or slowdown in getting approval. So I'd say those would be the two negatives or that I've seen.
Actually, I might suggest a study because I looked and I couldn't find evidence that when the market cools or when there is a downside, there's no evidence that the VCs and CVCs are acting that different.
Oh, different because the VCs are not. Yeah, that's a good point. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. I don't know
Yeah.
that would be actually it's good. I don't know if anyone's done that. That's good. It's a good thing.
I
Okay,
mean,
good.
from studying some of the facts and looking at the data, and I co-published with 6 pages some reports trying to point out
Oh,
actually
send them,
even in
send them, send them to me when we're send them to me
yeah
later. Good.
because I think corporate VC get a bad rep for leaving when things go bad, but actually that's the same for VCs. It's just that the expectation is CVC will do it, but VCs do it too, and then they come back. So yeah, I would share that with you
That's very
afterwards.
interesting. Okay, very interesting.
Now, I think there is one thing which I find interesting about what you say, which is in a way the U of uncertainty, is that I think corporate VCs have an opportunity to de-risk the the startup, but at the same time, on the negative, they might add new risks, dependencies, and everything. So I think the question is, are you a CVC that's reducing uncertainty, or are you one that's just shifting uncertainty?
That's a good. I mean, I think it's and I think it also varies with industries where again, life sciences,
Yep.
only one person really gets if it's a molecule, only one person gets it. Whereas in fintech or healthcare services, there are lots of different customers. So if you're one customer, it's not like you mess it up for or affect the other customers. So I think that it probably varies across industries.
I'm going to share something which I haven't shared on this podcast, but I think the healthcare CVCs are different from any other CVCs. And why they are different is that their mothership think exactly like venture capital. They also understand that you de-risk over time and you increase your investments over time as the probability of success increase, which
Hmm.
is so different from any other type of companies outside healthcare. Or you know what I mean? Most companies tries to invest in a distribution law type of outcome. But if I think about healthcare and new medicine, it's the same. It's a power law type of outcome. And I find that the CVCs from healthcare really have better support from their mothership because they already understand power law type of outcome.
Oh, very interesting. That's interesting.
So, if you were to give your students an advice about working with CVCs, what would you tell them to watch out for, but also what to ask for?
No, I think the things we talked about on the good side, will you be if it's appropriate to be a customer, you're going to be a customer. If it's appropriate to introduce me to customers, can you introduce me to customers? So it's really, I think the positive is you're getting help with acceptance and with customers. I think on the thing to watch out for. I think the two things we talked about, make sure they're going to be there, right?
Mhm.
Which
Mm.
and I think also that it's not bureaucratic, right? That people make decisions you know reasonably quickly rather than slowly. And I think those would be the again what we talked about, the positive and the negative and different. I'm sure some corporate VCs are better at those than others.
Yeah. Now, I know you're an expert in corporate governance, and I want to ask you about how does early stage startups should start thinking about corporate governance, not in a way that kills them early, but prepares them well for when they start to mature and start to get more late stage investors? Or would you say they should not worry about it at all?
No, I mean, I think the corporate governance is one where the the typical contract that you see in venture is a very smart contract. So what do I mean by that? A usual typical venture deal, and this is true early stage or later stage, is a convertible preferred, and the VC gets a liquidity preference. So the VC gets paid off first if things go wrong, which it should, right? They're putting in the money. If things go well, the entrepreneur makes a lot of money. If it doesn't go well, the VC should get paid first. So that's one. Two, it comes with some control rights. So maybe a board seat. There are protective provisions that give you veto power over various decisions. And again, that's designed to be there that if things go well, kind of the entrepreneur can do whatever he or she wants. And if things don't go well, then the VC starts to exert control. And so that's kind of what you want in a contract. Some of the things that went off the rails didn't have any governance. So FTX like
Mm-hmm.
apparently didn't have that, and we
Yep.
wasn't clear it had it either. So when things go wrong, that's a good structure to have for an investor, and I think even for the entrepreneur. Although the entrepreneurs, some of them don't want to give up any control, and so that's a little bit of a tension. And I think as the entrepreneur, what do you want to see? You should be thinking really once you take venture money, who do you want on your board, and who's going to be somebody who A supports you, but B I think pushes you a little. I mean, you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen board members where the CEO is going a bit off the rails, and the director is afraid to push back, and those can end up very badly. You kind of
Yep.
it benefits everybody if the director can push back, and then the entrepreneur listens. And so that's the advice I would give if you're an entrepreneur building a
Yep.
board is put people on who are going to challenge you, and
Yep.
also don't have too thin a skin. Like sort of take the feedback, listen, and if you have good directors, that turns into a virtuous cycle as opposed to a negative one. You get a bad director, then it's bad. So
True. I think that I've seen board members which I would qualify as cheerleaders. They always
mhm.
cheer for you, but they never push back. They never challenge you as an entrepreneur. That's not helping you. I mean, you might feel good, but at some point you just don't get value from these board members. So I think that's a really good advice you're giving here. I think that when I'm thinking of FTX and WeWork, I don't know if it's FOMO, fear of missing out, or if it's people who are falling in love too much with wanting too much to invest, and they compromise on that contract, which has been working so well for venture capital for so long. And so I feel like this is nearly more on the emotional front that people make mistakes, not on the rational side.
Yeah, I think that's very very likely true. I mean, that's certainly true. With FTX, right? People just got enamored and went in. So
Yeah. So one thing I tell my team is that every investment they make will be on their personal page on our website, and even if they leave, it will stay there. So don't do an FTX. I want to finish on the executive compensation because that's something you've studied, and this is something which is clearly important. But I think maybe you can share with us how we should think about executive compensation for early stage moving to late stage. Because there is always this transition from being a founder to then being the management team and getting the right talent into that maturing company.
I mean, I mean, this is true with later stage. I think it should be true with almost all stages that you want to have, cash compensation that people can live on. So early stage, you kind of expect the founder, it's going to be very lean. The founder is going to get paid something enough to pay the rent and some stuff, but not too much. And then as they execute and there's more cash flow, you can pay the founder a little bit more, but still keep the cash comp not too high. And same thing with people you bring in, and then you make it up on equity incentives. And you want to make sure the founder has a lot of stock, which they normally do. And then when you bring in new people, you want them to be incentivized with equity, because as an investor, you don't get paid till the stock's worth something. And it's also a selection that the you know somebody coming in, you want them to really believe in the company and believe the equity is going to be worth something. And so if they won't come in unless they get paid a lot of cash, it's a bad signal. I think that it's also true of public companies. I just assume keep the cash pay, or the salary on the low side. You can pay bonus as long as there's cash flow to pay the bonus. They earned it, and then you pay the most in equity, because that's where you get alignment.
So maybe I'm going to ask a spicy question, but I was in Paris last week for Hello Tomorrow. And clearly Europe doesn't have necessarily that compensation mindset of equity for upsides. Do you think that's a necessary condition for startups to do really, really well? Or do you think there's a European model where it's not that necessary? And this is spicy on purpose, so feel free to say this is not
No,
something.
I have this line: if you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys. And so that's I think that's true in the US. I think that's true in in Europe. I think that's a big disadvantage Europe has for public companies. They don't pay their public company execs a lot, and they've been jumping to the US. And they also go to private equity. It's great for the private equity investors who do pay for performance. And I think on the venture side, you have to do that, because people who are the super talented people you want, um, for the most part, want to get compensated. And even if they don't, it's like, if I have a choice, gee, I can do it here and not get compensated, or I can do it here and do the same thing and get compensated. That's where they're going to go.
I think that's a great golden nugget to finish this podcast with. It's amazing. Steve, thank you for your time and your insights. It was really, really good.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure, and I will I look forward to listening to this. And send me the studies you mentioned.